Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who joins us from around the world. We're so glad you're here.
It is wonderful to have you with us.
This is Andrew and Renee. Welcome to the Stack series.
And it is always a pleasure to be digging through the research with you.
Today, we are exploring the complex, high-stakes, and surprisingly high-tech world of sustainable agriculture and next-generation fertilizers.
You know, I have to admit, when we first started pulling this research and we're looking at sources from early 2026, I had a moment where I thought, fertilizer?
Yeah.
Really?
Right.
Is this going to be an hour talking about, dirt and chemicals?
Yeah.
It doesn't exactly scream thrilling conversation.
I had the exact same reaction. I mean, my first thought was this is a bit of a departure from, AI or quantum computing. But then I started reading. And I realized this isn't a dry topic at all. It's actually one of the most critical, high-stakes conversations happening on the planet right now.
High stakes is absolutely the right way to put it, because if you strip away all the jargon, what we're really discussing today is the fundamental engine room of human civilization.
The machine that keeps 8 billion of us alive.
Precisely. And the tension in these documents, it just jumps off the page. This isn't just a story about farming. It's a story about technology, survival, and a really massive paradox.
Let's start there with the paradox.
Yeah.
Because I think that frames everything else we're going to get into.
It does. The paradox is this. On one hand, you have this invention, commercial fertilizer, that is arguably one of the most important technologies in human history.
There's a statistic that kept popping up in almost every analysis we looked at.
The 50% number.
Yeah, the 50% number. The commercial fertilizers, specifically synthetic nitrogen, are responsible for keeping about half of the world's population alive.
Just stop and think about that for a second. Half. That means for half the people listening right now, your existence is, in a very real way, thanks to a chemical process.
The Haber-Bosch process.
The Haber-Bosch process, exactly. Invented in the early 1900s. It's the industrial method for pulling nitrogen, which is abundant in the air, and turning it into ammonia, which is plant food.
Before that, we were limited by, manure? Natural sources?
We were limited by manure, by crop rotation, by how many nutrients we could recycle. The system had a hard ceiling. Haber-Bosch broke that ceiling. It let us, in essence, pull bread out of thin air.
It's a miracle of chemistry. It's the reason we can sustain a population of 8 billion people on this planet instead of, say, 4 billion.
It's a miracle, no question. But, and this is the other side of the paradox, the bill for that miracle is coming due.
And it is a very, very steep bill.
The same invention that saved us is now pushing our planetary boundaries to the absolute breaking point. We have these enormous dead zones in the oceans, some the size of small countries, caused by fertilizer runoff.
And what about the climate impact?
Massive. Greenhouse gas emissions, not just from the energy-intensive production of these fertilizers, but from the soil itself after we apply them.
So that's the tension. We literally can't live without it because billions of people would starve.
But we can't keep living with it, at least not in its current form, because we're destroying the very biosphere that allows us to farm in the first place.
A classic rock and a hard place situation. And looking at the 2026 context, that pressure is just ratcheting up.
Oh, yeah. The global fertilizer market is huge, over $148 billion. It's a behemoth. But at the same time, we're staring down the barrel of a global population set to hit 9.7 billion by 2050.
That's almost 2 billion more mouths to feed.
And we have to do it on the same amount of land, probably less given soil degradation, and we have to do it while somehow fixing the climate crisis. It is the ultimate squeeze.
So that's really our mission today, to understand how we navigate that. How do we get from a model of feeding the world at the expense of the planet to something more like feeding the world while healing the planet?
I like that framing. Healing the planet is a tall order.
It is. So to guide us through what is a massively complex topic, we've broken this conversation down into 4 main parts.
First, we need to lay the foundations. What do we think we know? We have to get to grips with the basics of soil and those 3 letters you see on every bag of plant food, NPK, and we really need to understand why the current system is so leaky.
Then we'll dive into the active debate. This is where the science and the industry don't always see eye to eye. We'll look at the battle over what green even means and get past that simple organic versus synthetic argument.
After that, my favorite part, we'll explore the frontiers. This is the stuff that sounds like science fiction, but is happening right now in 2026. We're talking about programming microbes, using nanotechnology, deploying AI in fields.
And finally, we'll wrap up with the implications. What does all this mean for geopolitics? for the economics of a small family farm, and for the ethics of how we produce our food.
It's a big journey, but it's a crucial one.
Absolutely. So let's get started. Okay, let's lay the groundwork. Section 1, foundations.
Right. What we think we know. And for most people, I think fertilizer is just, plant food.
Yeah, you go to the store, you buy a bag. It has 3 numbers on it. NPK. I'll be honest, before digging into this stack, I just thought of them as like general vitamins for a plant.
And that's not wrong, but they're the big ones. The macronutrients. They're the protein, carbs, and fats of the plant world. Without them, the plant doesn't just get sick, it dies.
So let's break down that big 3 so we're all on the same page. First up, N, nitrogen.
Nitrogen is the headliner. It's the accelerator. If you want a good analogy for the human body, think of nitrogen as what builds muscle mass. It's a core component of chlorophyll.
The stuff that makes plants green.
The very same. And chlorophyll is what allows the plant to photosynthesize, to turn sunlight into energy. So more nitrogen means more green, more leaves, more stems, more growth.
It's the gas pedal. You push it, and the plant goes.
A perfect way to put it. You dump nitrogen on your lawn, it turns dark green, and you have to mow it twice that week. That's N in action.
Okay, got it. Next is P, phosphorus.
Phosphorus is more like the skeleton and the battery of the plant. It's absolutely vital for transferring energy within the plant cells.
So it's about the internal machinery.
Exactly. But it also has a very physical role. It's crucial for root development, for setting flowers, and for producing fruit or grain.
So if I want a plant with a really strong root system, or if I'm growing tomatoes and I want big tomatoes, that's where phosphorus comes in.
You've got it. Without enough phosphorus, you might get a tall, leafy green plant, but it won't produce the actual food part that you want to eat.
Makes sense. And last, K, potassium, which I have to say always confused me. Starts with a P, but the symbol is K.
It's from the Latin, kalium. But think of potassium as the plant's overall regulator. It's like the immune system and the circulatory system rolled into one.
Also,
it helps manage water inside the plant. It controls the opening and closing of the stomata, the little pores on the leaves. And it helps the plant fight off disease and stress from drought or heat. It builds resilience.
So, to recap, nitrogen for growth, phosphorus for roots and fruits, and potassium for overall health.
The big 3. And for the better part of a century, really since the Green Revolution kicked off, our agricultural strategy has been incredibly simple, almost brutally so.
Just dump as much of the big 3 on the field as you can.
That was the logic. If a little is good, a lot must be better. We treated the soil like an inert bank account. We just made chemical deposits and withdrew crop yields.
And for a while, it worked. I mean, yields went through the roof. We fed billions of people.
It absolutely worked. It was a stunning success, but, and this is where the whole story pivots, we started to realize something shocking about the inefficiency problem.
This is the part that, frankly, blew my mind when I was reading the reports. The statistic that crops only actually use about 30 to 40% of the nutrients we apply.
That's the global average, and in many places, it's even worse.
Let that number sink in, 30 to 40%. That means for every 10 bags of fertilizer a farmer spreads, 6 or 7 of them are just wasted.
Wasted is a gentle word for it. Wasted implies it just vanishes and does no harm. The reality is much, much worse. It doesn't just disappear.
This is the leakiness concept.
Exactly. The system is incredibly leaky. That other 60 to 70% becomes pollution.
Okay, so where does it go? Let's trace it.
Let's take nitrogen. It's very, very mobile. It's slippery. When you apply it in the form of nitrate, it's highly water-soluble. So the first time it rains,
it just washes away.
it washes off the field, into the drainage tile, into the local creek, which flows into a river, which eventually flows into the ocean.
And on its way, it's acting like fertilizer for everything it touches.
Precisely. You are unintentionally fertilizing the entire watershed. And when all that nitrogen hits the coast, the algae have a feast.
The algal blooms.
An explosion of algae. They multiply like crazy, and then when they die and decompose, the bacteria that eat them consume all the available oxygen in the water.
Creating those dead zones.
The dead zones, hypoxic zones, huge areas of the ocean where fish, shrimp, crabs, nothing can survive. So that's the water pathway.
But the sources also talked about an air pathway.
Yes. Volatilization. The fertilizer on the field can turn into gas. 2 main ones. Ammonia gas, which causes acid rain, and nitrous oxide.
And nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas.
It's not just a greenhouse gas, it's a monster. The reports are clear on this. Molecule for molecule, nitrous oxide is nearly 300 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide.
300 times.
Yes. So when a farmer overapplies nitrogen, they're not just wasting money and polluting water, they are actively contributing to climate change in a very powerful way.
I came up with an analogy for this, and it might just be because I'm always thinking about food.
Go on.
It's like going to the grocery store, filling your cart with a week's worth of food, paying for it all, and then on your way out the door, you just take 60% of your bags and dump them straight into the river.
And then you go home and you're still hungry.
And the river is turning a weird shade of green.
That is the fundamental inefficiency of modern conventional agriculture. We're spending a fortune in money and energy, and most of it is causing harm instead of good.
So this brings us to the central term of our whole conversation today, sustainable fertilizer. Now that feels like a term that gets thrown around a lot, but based on our research, it's not just another word for organic, is it?
No, and that's probably the most important distinction we can make. It's not a marketing term for hippie farming. The technical definition from the sources is that it's a class of soil amendments specifically engineered to nourish plants while minimizing all those negative consequences we just talked about.
So it's an engineering problem at its core.
It really is. It's about achieving ecological integrity. It has to do more than just boost this year's harvest. It has to maintain and ideally improve the health of the soil for the long term.
The Fertilizer Institute has a framework they promote, the 4Rs. I found this to be a really clear way to think about what needs to change.
Yes, the 4 Rs of nutrient stewardship. It's become the industry standard, at least in theory. Right source, right rate, right time, and right place.
It sounds so simple, like just common sense, but let's unpack why it's actually really hard to do.
Okay, so right source means using the correct type of nutrient for that specific crop in that specific soil. You don't feed a soybean the same diet as corn.
Right. Rate means applying only what the plant actually needs, not just a generic amount. But that means you have to know what's already in the soil to begin with.
Which requires testing and data. Then there's right time. This means applying the fertilizer when the plant is in its rapid growth phase and can actually use it.
Not in, say, late fall when the plant's going dormant.
Exactly. If you do that, the fertilizer just sits there all winter, waiting for the spring snowmelt to wash it away before the plant ever wakes up. Total waste.
And finally, right place. Putting the nutrient where the roots can get it.
Not just broadcasting it over the entire surface of the field, but placing it in a band right next to the seed row, for example.
When you lay it out like that, it becomes obvious that you can't really do the 4Rs just by eyeballing it. It requires a level of precision, a level of data that we just didn't have for most of agricultural history.
You can't just spray and pray. And that leads to this huge mental shift that's happening in agriculture. We are finally moving away from seeing soil as just an inert sponge.
Just a physical medium to hold the plant up while we pour chemicals on it.
Right. To seeing soil as what it really is, a living system.
Yeah.
A biome.
I read a statistic that a single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain more living organisms than there are human beings on Earth.
That's the scale. We're talking billions of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. And this whole ecosystem does work. It creates structure that holds water, it cycles nutrients, it sequesters carbon.
But the overuse of synthetic fertilizers can damage that system.
It can. These are essentially salts, and high concentrations of salt can dehydrate and kill that microbial life. You essentially start to sterilize the soil.
So the very tool you're using to feed the plant is killing the natural system that's also supposed to feed the plant.
Exactly, and you get trapped in this vicious cycle. The soil biology degrades, so it can't supply nutrients naturally, which means you need to apply more chemical fertilizer just to get the same yield you got last year.
It's like an addiction. The more you use, the more you need.
It's a perfect analogy, and breaking that addiction cycle is what the sustainable agriculture movement is all about. It's not just about swapping one product for another, it's about rebooting the entire living engine of the soil.
Okay, so that foundation is pretty clear. We've got a leaky, inefficient system that creates pollution and degrades the soil. We need to fix it. But when we move into our second segment, Section 2, the active debate, it's obvious that how we fix it is where things get messy.
Oh, extremely messy. Because sustainability is a powerful buzzword, and anytime there's a $148 billion market at stake, you're going to have a war over definitions.
And the sources warn explicitly about the risk of greenwashing.
They do. And there's a real split between how, say, an academic ecologist defines a green fertilizer and how a corporate marketing department might define it.
What's the core of that disagreement?
The academic is looking at it through the lens of planetary boundaries. They're doing a full life cycle analysis. What was the carbon footprint to make this? Where do the raw materials come from? What happens to it after it leaves the farm? Can we do this for 1,000 years without crashing the system?
And the corporation.
They might be looking at it from a perspective of efficiency per unit of production. If they invent a new chemical coating that makes their traditional fertilizer 5% less likely to run off, they can slap a green label on it.
It's the clean coal argument applied to agriculture.
It's very similar. Is it a genuine paradigm shift, or is it just a slightly more efficient version of the old, broken model? That's the core of the debate. And you as a consumer have to be really skeptical of labels.
And this leads us straight into the biggest, most common trap in this whole conversation. Organic versus synthetic.
The binary trap.
Yeah, the public perception is that this is a settled issue. Organic is good, it comes from nature. Synthetic is bad, it comes from factory. End of story.
That's the narrative, for sure. But the sources are pretty clear that it's a vast oversimplification, a trap.
Why is it a trap?
Because it ignores the physics and the scale of the problem. Let's be clear. Synthetic fertilizers have massive issues. We talked about the Haber-Bosch process. It's estimated to consume somewhere between 1% and 2% of the entire world's energy supply.
That's an astonishing number.
It's huge. And we've covered the runoff risk, so yes, big problems. But now let's look at organic. Let's talk about manure and compost.
They sound great, they're natural, they're recycled.
They are, but they have their own set of challenges. The first one is nutrient density. They're bulky.
Meaning you need a lot of it.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
A bag of synthetic urea fertilizer might be 46% nitrogen by weight. It is incredibly concentrated. A pile of composted manure might be 2 or 3% nitrogen, and a lot of that is tied up in organic matter.
So to get the same amount of N onto a 100-acre cornfield, you don't need a truck, you need a fleet of trucks.
You need a whole fleet, which means diesel fuel, carbon emissions from transport, soil compaction from the heavy machinery. The logistics are a nightmare at scale.
Okay, that's the bulk problem. What else?
Predictability. The nutrient release is unpredictable. When you put a synthetic pellet on the ground, it's just chemistry. You know how fast it will dissolve. With manure, the organic matter has to be broken down by soil microbes to release the nutrients.
And that process depends on things like temperature and moisture.
Exactly. So you might put the compost down, but the plant doesn't get the food until weeks later when it warms up. Or you could have a heat wave. After a rainstorm, the microbes go crazy, release a huge glut of nitrogen all at once.
It runs off just like the chemical stuff.
It runs off just the same. Organic nitrogen is still nitrogen. E. coli contamination in lettuce and spinach. That often comes from raw manure runoff from nearby fields, so it's not a simple good versus bad.
So that idea that we can just flip a switch and feed 9.7 billion people an all-organic diet.
The math just doesn't work. We may not physically have enough manure and compost on the planet to do it with current methods.
So the real innovation's happening in the middle ground. The sources talked a lot about enhanced efficiency fertilizers, or EEFs.
This is a really interesting category. Think of them as smart chemical fertilizers. They take the powerful, concentrated synthetic nutrient, but they package it in a way that makes it behave better.
Like a time-release capsule for medicine.
That's the perfect analogy. They're often called controlled-release fertilizers. They might coat the urea pellet in a polymer or a layer of sulfur that biodegrades slowly over weeks or months.
So instead of giving the plant a huge meal all at once that it can't possibly eat,
you're giving it a slow, steady IV drip of nutrients that matches its growth curve.
Which means there's never a big surplus of nitrogen just sitting in the soil waiting for a rainstorm to wash it away.
Precisely. It dramatically improves that 30–40% efficiency number. It's a pragmatic, incremental improvement.
But there's a deeper, more philosophical debate that came up in the research. The land-sparing versus land-sharing argument.
Yes, this is a major fault line in conservation and ecology. It forces you to answer a really tough question. What is the main goal of our landscape?
Let's break down the two sides. First, land-sparing.
The land-sparing camp, also called intensification, argues that we should use the most powerful tools we have, including high-tech fertilizers, to grow as much food as possible on the smallest amount of land possible.
The logic is, if we can triple the yield on our existing farmland, we don't need to cut down the Amazon rainforest to plant more soybeans.
Right. We farm our agricultural land intensely, like a factory, so that we can spare the wild lands and leave them completely untouched for nature. You create a hard border between the farm and the wilderness.
Okay, so that's one vision. What's the other?
The land-sharing vision, or extensification, this side argues for much lower input farming, maybe organic, maybe regenerative agriculture, the kind of farming that is much friendlier to biodiversity on the farm itself.
So you have hedgerows for birds, wildflowers for pollinators, healthy soil life.
Yes, you share the agricultural land with nature, but, and it's a huge but, lower inputs almost always mean lower yields per acre.
So to grow the same amount of food to feed everyone, you need a much bigger farm.
You need to expand the footprint of agriculture, which might mean you do have to cut down that forest to make room for your sprawling, low-intensity, nature-friendly farm.
That is a wicked problem. Do you save the forest by sacrificing the field, or do you save the field by sacrificing the forest?
There's no easy answer, and the reports don't declare a winner. The best strategy probably depends on the local context,
Right.
but what we're seeing is policy trying to force the issue.
You're talking about the EU's farm-to-fork strategy.
That's the big one. The
Yeah.
European Union has mandated a 20% reduction in fertilizer use across the board by 2030.
20% by 2030. We're in 2026. That is an incredibly aggressive target.
It is, and it creates this immense tension. Farmers are caught in the middle. They're saying, look, I want to be more sustainable, but if you just tell me to cut my main input by 20%, my yield is going to drop and I'll go out of business.
And global food prices will spike.
Of course. So you cannot just mandate use less without also providing a new technology that allows farmers to grow the same or even grow more.
Which is the perfect transition into our third and most exciting segment, Section 3, Frontiers. Because the only way out of that trap is through innovation that fundamentally changes the agricultural math.
Exactly. We need a new toolkit. And this is where we move beyond just tweaking the chemistry and get into biology, physics, and data science.
Let's start with what feels like the biggest paradigm shift of all, the microbial revolution.
I agree. For the last 100 years, our approach has been all about chemistry, adding atoms of N, P, and K to the soil. Now, for the first time, we're focusing on biology. We're adding life.
I was fascinated reading about the company Pivot Bio, which was mentioned in nearly every report on this topic. Their whole approach flips the script. Instead of feeding the plant, they're essentially enabling the plant to feed itself.
That's the core concept. It all comes back to a natural process called nitrogen fixation.
Can you give us the quick science breakdown on that?
Sure. The air all around us, the air you're breathing right now, is 78% nitrogen gas. It is the most abundant nutrient we have. But plants can't use it.
Why not?
In the air, it exists as N2. Two nitrogen atoms held together by an incredibly strong triple bond. Plants don't have the biological machinery to break that bond. It's like being adrift in the ocean, surrounded by water you can't drink.
Locked up and inaccessible.
Exactly. Now, for millions of years, nature has had a solution. A group of plants called legumes, think soybeans, peas, alfalfa, they've formed a symbiotic relationship with certain soil bacteria.
Right, the bacteria live in little nodules on the plant's roots.
They do. And inside those nodules, the bacteria perform a miracle. They take that N2 gas from the air and they fix it. They break the triple bond and convert it into ammonia, a form of nitrogen the plant can absorb.
So soybeans effectively make their own fertilizer.
They do. But our staple crops, the grasses that feed the world, corn, wheat, rice, they can't do this. They've been dependent on us spoon-feeding them nitrogen.
Until now.
Until now. What companies like Pivot Bio did was ask a revolutionary question. What if we could give corn that superpower?
So they didn't genetically modify the corn plant itself.
No, and that's the brilliant part, because it avoids a lot of the regulatory and public perception issues of GMOs. They didn't touch the plant's genetics. They tweaked the genetics of the microbes.
So they found bacteria that already live on corn roots.
Yes, microbes like Klebsiella vermicola. These bacteria were already there, but their nitrogen-fixing genes were essentially switched off, dormant. The scientists at Pivot Bio figured out how to switch those genes back on.
So they created a super probiotic for corn.
That's a great way to think of it. You apply these microbes to the seed or in the furrow at planting. They then colonize the root system, forming a living biofilm around the roots. And for the entire growing season, they just sit there, pulling nitrogen from the air and feeding it directly to the plant.
It's like giving every corn plant its own personal microscopic fertilizer factory.
A factory that's attached right at the point of need. And the sources call the product weatherproof nitrogen.
That term stood out to me. Why weatherproof?
Because of the leakiness problem we discussed, chemical nitrogen washes away in the rain, but these microbes are physically attached to the root. They're sticky. So if there's a downpour, they don't go anywhere. They just keep working.
That provides a huge level of consistency for the farmer.
And it creates that slow, steady drip feed of nitrogen that the plant prefers, rather than the big, wasteful surge you get from a chemical application. The sources mention their products, Proven 40 and G3, as being at the forefront of this.
This feels like a true game changer. Okay, let's shift from biology to physics. Nanotechnology. Small tech, big impact.
Yeah. This is really on the cutting edge. Nanofertilizers are nutrients that have been engineered at the nanoscale, which is typically between 1 and 100 nanometers.
Give me a sense of scale. How small is that?
A human hair is about 80,000 nanometers wide. A sheet of paper is the 100,000. So we are talking about particles that are smaller than a virus.
And why does making a fertilizer particle that tiny make a difference?
Two main reasons. First is surface area. When you shrink a particle down that small, its surface area to volume ratio explodes. This allows it to react and be absorbed much more efficiently by the plant.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second reason?
Direct penetration. Because these nanoparticles are so incredibly small, they can pass directly through the pores or stomata on a plant's leaves, or even through the cell walls of the roots. They can take a shortcut.
So the plant's ability to absorb them is dramatically higher.
Much, much higher. The sources suggest that nanotechnology could push that nutrient use efficiency number from the dismal 30% all the way up to 80 or even 90%.
That would be a revolution itself, a tripling of efficiency.
And it gets even more futuristic. Researchers are designing smart nanofertilizers. They're encapsulating the nutrient in a shell that is designed to dissolve only in response to a specific trigger.
A trigger from the plant.
It could be a chemical signal released by the roots that basically says, I'm hungry now. Or it could be an environmental trigger, like a change in soil pH or a certain moisture level. The nutrient is only released when conditions are perfect for uptake.
So it's not just targeted delivery, it's timed delivery.
It's the ultimate in precision. But we have to be realistic. The big hurdle right now is cost and scale. Manufacturing these at the millions of tons needed for global agriculture is still a major challenge.
Okay, let's move to the third frontier, which is more about systems thinking. The circular economy and nutrient recovery.
The waste-to-wealth philosophy. This is about closing the loop. For the last century, we've had a linear system.
We mine phosphorus from a rock in Morocco.
We shipped it around the world, put it on a field in Iowa, the corn takes it up, a cow eats the corn, a person eats the cow, and then the nutrient ends up in a wastewater treatment plant and is eventually discharged into a river.
A one-way trip to pollution.
And an even bigger problem, we are physically running out of high-grade phosphate rock. It's a finite resource. Some projections say we could hit peak phosphorus within a few decades.
So recovery isn't just a nice idea, it's a necessity.
It's an absolute necessity for the long-term survival of our food system. And the technology to do it is emerging. Things like ammonia stripping can pull nitrogen out of manure lagoons. But the coolest example is struvite.
Struvite, I think I've heard of that. Isn't it related to kidney stones?
It is, unfortunately. It's the same mineral, magnesium ammonium phosphate. It's a problem in wastewater treatment plants because it precipitates out of the water and forms a rock-hard scale that clogs pipes.
So it's a nuisance they have to spend money to remove.
It was. But now, clever engineers have designed reactors that intentionally force the struvite to precipitate out in a controlled way so they can harvest it as clean white crystals. And it turns out struvite is a phenomenal, naturally slow-release phosphorus fertilizer.
So we're literally mining our sewage for a resource that we're running out of.
We are turning a costly waste problem into a valuable resource. It's the circular economy in action.
And the same logic applies to manure valorization.
Right, which is just a fancy term for making manure more valuable. For a huge dairy or hog farm, manure isn't a resource, it's a massive liability. It's a disposal problem.
But new technologies are being developed to process it.
They can dewater it, pelletize it, kill all the pathogens, and create a standardized, easy-to-handle, dry, organic fertilizer that can be bagged and sold at a garden center. Again, turning a problem into a product.
Now, we talked earlier about the huge energy footprint of the Haber-Bosch process. That brings us to the industrial frontier of green ammonia.
This is the big play from the industrial giants, companies like Yara and CF Industries. They see the writing on the wall about carbon.
So how do you make ammonia green?
It all comes down to the source of the hydrogen. The H in NH3. Traditional ammonia production, called gray or brown ammonia, gets its hydrogen from natural gas, from methane. And that process releases a lot of CO2.
And green ammonia?
Green ammonia gets its hydrogen from water, H2O. You use a process called electrolysis, where you run a massive electrical current through water to split the hydrogen atoms from the oxygen atoms.
And if that electricity comes from renewable sources like wind or solar,
Then the whole process is virtually carbon-free. The resulting ammonia molecule is identical, but its production footprint is clean.
that feels like a critical piece of decarbonizing the entire food system.
It is. It's still more expensive than the traditional method, but as carbon taxes rise and renewable energy costs fall, the economics are starting to make sense.
Okay, last frontier, and it's a big one. Precision agriculture and AI. This is really the right place and right rate part of the 4Rs taken to the extreme.
It is. We are finally moving beyond blanket application, treating a 100-acre field as if it's one uniform thing.
Because it's not. Even in a flat field, the soil can vary dramatically from one spot to the next.
A low spot holds more water, a sandy ridge holds less. One area might be rich in potassium, another might be deficient.
The sources mention tech players like Pharmanaut and Jeopard. What do they do?
They use data from satellites and drones, high-resolution multispectral imagery. They can see things the human eye can't. They can measure the chlorophyll content of the plants from space, which tells them if the plants are stressed or hungry.
So they build a detailed health map of the field.
A prescription map, down to the square meter. Then that map is loaded into the computer on the tractor or the sprayer.
And the tractor's equipment can adjust on the fly.
This is variable rate application, or VRA. As the tractor drives across the field, its GPS knows exactly where it is. The computer reads the map and tells the nozzles on the fertilizer spreader to open or close second by second.
So it's applying more nutrients to the poor spots and less or even none to the rich spots.
Exactly. No waste. Maximum efficiency. And it's getting even more sophisticated with digital twins.
A virtual copy of the farm.
The complete digital replica. You can run simulations. What happens if I plant this variety of seed? What happens if there's a drought in July? What's my optimal fertilizer strategy? You can test a dozen scenarios in the cloud before you ever spend $1 on real inputs. It's like a flight simulator for farming.
All of this technology is incredible. But it also raises huge questions, which brings us perfectly to our final section. Section 4, implications. This isn't just about technology. It's about power, money, and ethics.
Let's start with geopolitics, because you can't talk about fertilizer without talking about national power.
The reports noted that a country like India is making a huge strategic effort to diversify its fertilizer imports away from a single source like China.
Absolutely. Because fertilizer isn't just a commodity, it's a strategic asset, as critical as oil or microchips. If your supply of fertilizer gets cut off, you are 6 months away from a food crisis and civil unrest.
It's a matter of national security.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And then you have the resource depletion issue we talked about with phosphorus. One country, Morocco, controls over 70% of the world's known phosphate rock reserves.
That's an OPEC-level concentration of a critical resource.
It makes Morocco the Saudi Arabia of phosphorus. This is why that circular economy tech, recovering nutrients from waste, isn't just an environmental nice-to-have. It's a geopolitical necessity to reduce that kind of dependency.
Now let's bring it down from the global scale to the individual farmer, the economic reality of this transition.
This is where the rubber meets the road. There was a quote in one of the reports from a farmer that just stopped me cold. He said, "With farming, I can only grow a crop once a year. In my whole life, I'll probably only get 50 tries ever."
I remember that line, 50 tries ever. It puts everything in perspective.
Think about that mindset. In our world, in the tech world, we preach fail fast. If our code has a bug, we push a patch an hour later, it's no big deal.
We iterate constantly.
A farmer can't iterate. If they try one of these new biologicals and it doesn't work, if their yield drops by 30%, they haven't just had a bad day. They've lost an entire year's income. They could lose the family farm. They've used up 2% of their entire professional career on one failed experiment.
So the legendary risk aversion of farmers isn't because they're old-fashioned.
It's because they are making a massive high-stakes gamble every single spring. And you can't blame them for sticking with what they know has worked, even if it's imperfect.
Which is why the role of government subsidies is so critical. The reports touched on how the 2026 subsidy landscape in the U.S. and Europe is shifting.
It is. Governments are finally realizing they can't just expect farmers to bear 100% of the cost and risk of this green transition. The public gets the environmental benefits, so the public has to help pay for it.
So we're seeing more payments for things like planting cover crops or adopting no-till practices.
Yes, and we're seeing new programs to de-risk innovation. Things like government-backed insurance that says to a farmer, try this new microbial product from Pivot Bio. We guarantee that your yield won't drop below your 5-year average, and if it does, we'll pay you the difference.
That removes the existential fear of trying something new.
It has to. Society needs to share in that risk.
And speaking of society, let's talk about the ethics. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is a perfect case study.
It is. It's a textbook example of a negative externality. A farmer in Minnesota or Iowa applies fertilizer to make a living and to feed the country. It's a rational act.
But that fertilizer runs off into the Mississippi River.
And it travels 2,000 miles downstream and creates a massive dead zone that destroys the livelihood of a shrimp fisherman in Louisiana. The fisherman in Louisiana is paying the price for the farmer's actions in Iowa.
So who's ethically responsible?
Is it the farmer? Is it the fertilizer company that sold the product? Is it the consumer who demands cheap food? The system is set up in a way that makes that ethical failure almost inevitable.
And there's another ethical dimension, human health. The idea of hidden hunger.
This is a fascinating and disturbing link because our agricultural system for the last 70 years has been obsessed with one thing, yield. Bushels per acre, tons per hectare. N, P, and K drive yield.
But what about all the other things plants need, the micronutrients?
Exactly. Zinc, iron, magnesium, selenium. Because we've been neglecting overall soil health and just pumping in the big three, the levels of these vital micronutrients in our soils have declined.
So the food we grow has also become less nutritious.
The apple your grandparent ate in 1950 likely had significantly more nutrients than the cosmetically perfect high-yield apple you buy today. We have created a system that produces abundant calories, but they are increasingly empty calories. We are simultaneously overfed and undernourished.
So restoring soil health isn't just an environmental project. It's a public health project.
It's fundamental to human health.
So as we pull all these threads together, what's the future outlook? What's the 2050 vision that emerges from these reports?
The one phrase that kept coming up, especially in the Future of Fertilizer report, was radical collaboration.
What does that mean in this context?
It means that no one part of the system can solve this alone. The big chemical company, the small biotech startup, the tractor manufacturer, the data science firm, and the farmer, they all have to work together in ways they never have before.
The data from the John Deere tractor has to inform the next generation of microbes from the Pivot Bio lab.
Precisely. It requires an open, integrated ecosystem. And the ultimate goal of that collaboration is a concept called decoupling.
Decoupling. Break that down for us.
For all of modern history, human prosperity has been tightly coupled to environmental damage. If you wanted more food, more energy, more stuff, you had to burn more, pollute more, destroy more. The lines on the graph went up together.
The goal is to break that link.
To decouple them. To have the graph of food production continue to go up, while the graph of fertilizer runoff, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity loss goes down, to produce more with less.
It's a monumental challenge.
It's one of the defining challenges of our century. But honestly, after spending weeks with this research, seeing the sheer ingenuity being applied, the nanotech, the microbes, the green ammonia plants, I actually feel a sense of optimism.
We have the tools, or at least we're building them.
The science is pointing the way, we have the tools. Now it comes down to the economics, the policy, and the collective will to actually deploy them at scale.
A hopeful, if challenging, note to end on. It's not a story of inevitable doom. It's a story of a difficult but possible transition.
A necessary one.
Before we wrap up, thank you to all our partners, sponsors, and scholars who made this podcast and the research possible. We're truly grateful for your support. And to our listeners, thank you for being part of this journey with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and follow Stack Studios for more informative content. And support us on Patreon.
Until next time. Stay curious, keep learning, and let the search for wisdom guide you forward. Have a great day.